It's the guy that I think is the best in the world at ground and pound. This guy drops sick bombs.
And he's tapping via crucifix. Joe Diesel Wakes wins it in his hometown.
Well, I was in 8th grade, and then I made it. The reason I was invited because the assistant wrestling coach, he heard from the feeder program coach that because I was wrestling with kids my age, and it wasn't even, I was like men with kids, you know. I was just a lot better, and so he tells me because they had a weak 171 pounder, and he goes, why don't you come to wrestle-offs, because at that point you could be in 8th grade and wrestle. You couldn't go to high school. You just, after school, you would just go and if we were going somewhere else, you would go on the bus. Anyways, so I went in there and I was really nervous, and then I met Coach Fernandez, and then this guy's name was Luke something or other, and then he was a senior, and his dream was to place in state. I guess he wasn't weak, but I don't know. I guess he worked really hard. He didn't have God-given gifts. He had good work ethic. I kind of feel bad for him in hindsight, because we had a wrestle off. Because all it is like in practice, the coach will act as a referee, and you have a wrestle off, and whoever wins gets the starting position. So, and they would do that every week if need be. So like for the first month, this guy would keep trying to wrestle off with me and beat me, and then I would beat him handily every time, and then that was the first time my coach, his name was Randy Fernandez, and he said, I've never seen an 8th grader actually be able to wrestle on varsity. This is the first for me. It's kind of exciting. I'm like, oh, cool, thank you, because everybody would always talk about him, and he actually wrestled Don Fry in the state championship and lost to him, and then but he was into the UFC, and so was I. So we would talk about stuff like that, and then remember, because I was wrestling and boxing at the same time. And this is after I placed in state, and I was a freshman, and he goes because at that time I knew I wanted to fight. I knew I didn't know if I wanted to be a professional boxer. I didn't know if I wanted to be in mixed martial arts, but I knew mixed martial arts didn't pay anything, but I didn't know what it was going to turn out to be. So he goes, every fight, a fight usually ends up on the ground. Which he's right in hindsight, because that was before, the sport, people really started mixing things up. And then so he talked me into just concentrating on wrestling and not boxing, because I dropped boxing for 4 years to concentrate on wrestling. And then, because at that point I had 64 amateur fights in boxing, and that's a wealth of fights for especially my age, and I started to confide in him things at home, and then there was a point in time, because as a freshman I placed 5th in state, which I don't know, they were hoping I was going to be a 4-timer, but I wasn't. I was a 3-timer, which is good. But anyway, so I ended up after I didn't win state, I kind of took it bad, and then I started to smoke pot with kids, started to drink, and then I actually dropped out of high school my sophomore year, and then he drove to my house, and he walks into my house, and he was looking, because my house is just in disarray, and he's like, "You live here?" And he goes, and he was just shaking his head, and he goes, "You are far too talented to throw your life away. I hear you would smoke a bag of dog shit. They put it in front of you." I didn't know. I was like, yeah, I was kind of being a shithead, like I didn't care. And then he was, when you're young, you don't really take stuff like that to heart. But he sat there for 5 hours beating it to my head. He goes, "I'm going to be here every day until you do, because I was dropped out for like 2 months. And then so he came and picked me up from school every day, and I had to go to, because I ended up getting a fight in school, and then they suspended me, so it led to me dropping out. So I had to go to this private school for like 3 months until I had to go back, allowed to go back. And still, they didn't know I was dyslexic. And so I was in special classes, and which was horribly embarrassing. And I remember a teacher saying, if you would just look at his work and not speak to him, you'd think he was retarded. And that fucking sucked. I was like, oh man. But they would just pass me for football and wrestling. And then I answered a question like, those questions like, how long does it take a train to get to point A, going traveling? And I answered it like real quick. And they're like, what? So they ended up giving me an IQ test. And my IQ is in the 130s, which is pretty high. And so I end up going, they end up giving me a tutor, a person that would go with me to every class to teach me how to read things as like someone with dyslexia, because I had to learn completely everything all over again. They passed me in classes which they should never have passed me in. So in the beginning of my high school career, I had like a 1.0, just enough to play sports, and then at the end I had like a 4.0. So, which gave me a combined GPA of like a 3.2 or something. But anyways, so he would take me back and forth these schools, and he was spending an extra 7 hours a day just with me, and he was talking to me just about how to be a man, how to conduct myself, and I kind of correlated with like how Tyson talks about custom auto, because my dad wasn't teaching me to be a good man, my coach was. And I would watch him and how he held himself, how he treated people, and ultimately that's what I do now, and how I am. And he taught me a lot. Taught me more about life than anything. He taught me how to wrestle, obviously, but taught me a lot. So I ended up going on and being a 3-time state champion, 3-time high school American, and I got offers to go to UCLA because I had scored high on my SATs or CTAs, and then and I didn't want to go to a school like that because I didn't want to leave my dad for some reason. So I chose to go to Division II school in Prescott, Arizona, and wrestle there. Even though I had already, I should backtrack because I had already started fighting at 16, which my coach was. He was a big fan. He was actually in my corner for my first bunch of fights, because when I went down there and I fought when I was young, I was in high school. My whole school would come out, and I didn't fight amateur. I just fight professional, and then it was something that he thought it was great, because I knew at that point I wanted to fight mixed martial arts because it was fun. My first fight, I fought a guy that was like 32 or 34. He was like 6-2. And my very first fight when I was 16, when he was with me, and I beat him very easily, and I remember him crying backstage, calling himself a pussy, and that's sad, But I mean, it was a good thing for me, and my dad again brought all of his people from work, and it was, I knew my dad, my coach, talked to me. I explained why he was doing the things he was doing, why this, why that. He never, what I really appreciate about him, he never put my father down, which he had every right to. He never made excuses for me, just explained why he did what he did. It's just so I could wrap my head around it, and which helped me a lot, because there was a lot of times I just didn't understand why someone could do this to somebody, And then, he just, anything I needed, I didn't have food in the house, he would come by and give me groceries, come get groceries for me, come take me to eat. If I didn't want to be alone, I was bored, he'd pick me up and we'd go drill. Just everything I wanted in a father. He meant the world to me.